Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. Let's do it. Let's play it forward. Real people, real stories, the struggle to play it forward. Episode number 634 is with author Ed Glaser. Ed, what an amazing book. Everybody who thinks they know everything about Hollywood needs to read this book. They don't know what really goes on here.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you very much.
How did you trip across this? I mean, this is so original.
Well, it started when I was in college. I was watching the Hannibal movies, and I don't remember why, but I was just kind of going through them, and that included two different versions of Red Dragon, the one that Michael Mann made in the 80s called Manhunter, and then the film Red Dragon from the 2000s. And I was just curious if there were any other remakes that I had somehow not been aware of. So I went to IMDb and started browsing around and discovered an Indian movie called Sangharsh, which was a remake of Silence of the Lambs. And when I say India, I mean Bollywood. And when I say Bollywood, I mean singing and dancing. And you have not lived until you've seen Hannibal Lecter sing and dance in a Zorro costume.
How the world remade Hollywood, which is just unbelievable in the way, like you're talking about this Bollywood moment.
Yes. And from there, I thought, well, gosh, there's got to be other unauthorized remakes of Hollywood films, right? Like, what else is out there? And very quickly, I came across the infamous Turkish Star Wars, which steals footage from Star Wars and is this hodgepodge of Flash Gordon and all kinds of other things. And that blew my mind. And then from there, it just kind of snowballed.
But I got to ask you a question, though, because we all live in this world of Disney, and they're quick to take you down if you have anything Disney on your websites, especially music. But how are they getting away with taking scenes from Star Wars without breaking that copyright law?
Well, there's a few reasons. One, we're talking about a pre-internet era. And so the thing is that, like, these companies, these studios would have needed to know that these movies existed. And they probably did not, at least not at the time, because many of these films were not released internationally. Many of them were screened almost exclusively in their home countries or in sort of the diaspora. In Turkey, you get some folks that have moved to Germany or so forth. But so, they had to kind of know that it was there. Even if they did, though, it would have to be worth their while to sue. And in many cases, you're talking about films that were made with almost no budget. The companies that made them didn't have money, or at least not much money. Right. And in some cases, these were films that were only released in their home country and tanked. So there were just not very deep pockets. But also, the thing about some of these Turkish films is that copyright laws were different in Turkey at that time. There were very strict rules about copyright for domestic artistic products, but very loose copyright restrictions when it came to international products. So it kind of wasn't a big deal for them to rip off an existing film.
The way you described that about how the quality really wasn't there, all of a sudden I start thinking about TikTok and the way that, to me, the greatest next producers and directors are on TikTok right now learning how to do it. We're all reenacting these movies. I mean, is it one and the same?
It's not probably exactly like that, but you could probably find some similarities. I mean, I think one of the most fascinating examples is Nigeria, and there's a Nigerian version of Titanic, which is not very good, but it's interesting to watch, and it was also done with no money. But Nigeria in particular has been a really fascinating case because they didn't really have a classic film industry because it was too expensive to do. But in the 1980s, video cameras became more available and affordable. And so you'd have these filmmakers, some amateurs, some from television, who would start making these super low budget video films that were released on the market that sort of told specifically Nigerian stories that became super popular. And then over the period of, a few decades went from basically no budget VHS films to really glossy Netflix films.
Which was a shock. It had to have been a shock.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I've you don't really get many cases of that level of progression so quickly because they were kind of basically running through the whole sort of I want to say history, but like learning production that quickly.
Yeah.
for an entire industry.
You just gave me one of the biggest flashbacks of my life when you talked about that sudden change, because when I was a kid and all of a sudden we had this new thing called cable TV, all these movies that I didn't know existed were there. That was such a culture shock. So they went through a culture shock as well.
Sure, yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. You settled on 65 global interpretations of iconic films. That in my heart says there's going to be more books, because you love digging in on these stories.
I do, and actually, you get 10 bonus ones in the book because it's 65 65 films that get remade. But there's a few versions of Superman, a few versions of Star Wars, and so you actually end up with 75 films in there.
So now we talk about movies, but a lot of these movies, they come with music as well. Did they have their own interpretation of the music? I know we talked about, the music in the movies in India, but what about other movies such as the Titanic? I mean, that movie, the soundtrack was just unstoppable.
Yeah, well, funny you should mention that, because that one uses an almost interminable loop of My Heart Will Go On, including a Hausa language version of My Heart Will Go On. You get a lot of Turkish films where they just didn't have the time or money. They were churning these films out, and they just didn't have the time or money to create new soundtracks. And so, they are lifting soundtracks from either the American versions of those films or just other records that they happen to have. So you get a version of The Exorcist that uses music from The Exorcist. You get Turkish Batman, which uses music from basically every 60s spy film that was ever made. So you do get the whole range. You get some with original music, and then some with like, hey, I know what that is. That's from Rambo.
Yes. In the next couple of weeks, we're gonna be seeing Deadpool and Wolverine. But I tell you, I laughed like a kid when I found out that in Turkey they had one that was based on Captain America and Spider-Man. I want to see that.
It is so wild. It is Captain America and Mexican wrestler El Santo versus an evil Spider-Man that can spontaneously clone himself.
Do you treat these as B-rated movies? Because, I mean, I love B movies, but only because I love to watch really bad made movies.
Well, so I treat them as entertainment. I mean, these are crowd pleaser movies, almost all of them. And I am a crowd, and I am pleased by them. But really, the sort of purpose of this book is to kind of tell the stories behind them, because you watch a movie like, Turkish Captain America and El Santo versus evil Spider-Man, and you wonder, where did this come from? Why was this made? How was this made? And the book tells those stories.
See, I'm just so fascinated with your passion for this, because, we all have our own interests, and we all really dig in when it comes to content. But you take us into an area of the world we're not used to, Ed. I mean, because I guess we're so Americanized.
That's part of it. And I think the way that we tend to have consumed these movies is in cherry-picked clips that are on YouTube. And so a lot of people have seen a clip of what is purported to be the Indian Superman, or the Turkish Rambo, or Bollywood Harry Potter or something, and they're only seeing a couple of minutes, and the comments are usually a whole bunch of snark and a lot of sort of ignorance about what these things are, and I think it's so much more fun if you understand where they came from. It's a much richer experience if you kind of know, hey, what is the deal with these films?
What's really interesting is that I've come across some of these clips, but I always just thought it was just people just screwing around. But now that, because of this book, it's really opened up my mind in the way of saying, no, these are full featured movies. I mean, I thought it was very interesting to see the remake of Star Trek. I mean, it was like, what the hell is this? And then all of a sudden you're going, wow, this is a real movie.
Mm-hmm. It was in Turkey. It was actually the first ever Star Trek motion picture, but it's based primarily on the Man Trap, the first episode of the show. But the cool thing is that while the original Star Trek series was all filmed in these little small sets built on sound stages, there weren't sound stages in Turkey, and so they would have to film on location. And so you get them filming all of the cool planet scenes in Ephesus. which is the site of one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. And so you get this incredible production value that you never could have seen on actual Star Trek, even though, the filmmaking is pretty rough because the resources are so limited.
This book, it really would be that one class that I would take at a community college. I would invest in going to a class to hear you open our minds and imaginations to this, because to me, this is a step in the direction of making greater, better pictures.
It is just so much fun. And I think part of the thing that I find unfortunate is that I worry that the title of the book ended up sounding too scholarly, and it's not a scholarly book. It's designed for anybody who enjoys movies. And I did a talk once at Wizard World a number of years ago, and it was the first night of the convention, and not a lot of people were there yet. And I talked to the guy who was hosting. I did a panel on international remakes and ripoffs of superheroes. And he was like, don't worry if not a lot of people come. The room ended up being packed, and it was not to see me. Like, obviously, like they were there to see like the clips and stuff, and people loved it. And that's the thing, is that I think there's so much that people can enjoy from these films, whether it's to see the silliness of what does Turkish Superman look like, to then learn, well, why did this happen?
See, and right away, I'm taken back to how I watch my Netflix and I watch my Hulu and anything else that's on that flat screen, in the way that I love watching these foreign films, because they have a different way of sharing stories, which inspires me as a creative person. And to me, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm drawn to this book, is because it's so unique in the way of saying, hey, think of it this way and not the way that you think you know.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to look at it, and it is very inspiring. It's when you hear about filmmakers like Roger Corman, who just passed away, and how he made a bajillion movies on no budget, and was just kind of attitude and scrappiness and a little bit of engineering knowledge and so forth. And it's like that, but an entire industries that were like that.
Let's talk about Dracula. I think we stole Dracula from another part of the world, and yet here is Istanbul, who stole our version of Dracula.
Oh my gosh, that one is a story all its own. Yes, there is a Turkish film called Dracula in Istanbul, and it's wild. It's from the 1950s. It's one of the earlier Turkish genre films, and it is a remarkably faithful adaptation of Dracula, despite, one, it is set in what was then the modern day, and two, it is not technically based on Dracula. It's based on a book called Kazikla Voyvoda, the Impaler Warlord, which is in fact a pirated version of Dracula. It was by an author and translator named Ali Reza Sefiolu, who took Dracula in the 1920s, translated it, but then rewrote it and abridged it to set it in Istanbul, to have its heroes be veterans of the Turkish Revolution, added all of these sections with nationalism, and was the first text to directly connect Dracula to Vlad the Impaler. And so that became the basis for the film, and it to this day remains one of the most faithful Dracula films.
Rocky Horror Picture Show, I've attended many midnight showings, but in Egypt, did they get to do it that way? Did they embrace it that way?
No, probably not. But
come on.
they and in fact, I don't know that Rocky Horror Picture Show, the original, ever quite. I'm sure it got a release there at some point, but in the 1980s, it got an Egyptian remake, or I would say an unauthorized ripoff, by a filmmaker who was a big fan of the original film. But the thing about Egypt is that you really couldn't show Rocky Horror, because it kind of checks all of the censors boxes.
Yeah, it does.
So the filmmaker had to kind of rewrite the film, at least the second 2/3 of it, and kind of made it about Dracula, but it still remakes a whole bunch of scenes from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, while at the same time commenting on the state of the Egyptian social structure and the economy.
Wow. While you were doing this project and continue to do your movie research, is there a movie that you hope that somebody, copied? Because I would love to see somebody in a different country redo Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. Because, I grew up loving that movie, but I know it was a B-rated movie, but I know in another country, they would tell a different story.
That is an excellent question. That is kind of an amazing idea. I don't know that you'd end up with like a Turkish Kiss or something, but I would totally be fascinated by like another band that's from another country in the same kind of deal. That would be wild. I'm a huge fan of heist movies, so I would love to see an international version of like the Thomas Crown Affair or something. But the thing is that, if you name a popular sort of genre film, there's a very good chance, prior to say like the 90s, there's a pretty good chance that it got a remake somewhere. So you get things like the Italian Warriors or Terminator or Predator. You get Bollywood Harry Potter. You get a Hong Kong RoboCop or a Turkish Exorcist or Indian Godfather. Turkish Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So there's so many out there that might already have a remake.
But I got to tell you, Ed, where I'm guilty with your book is that I'm not reading it in order. I'm going in there as I look at the title and I go right to it. So, and I'm sure I'm not going to be the only one that's going to do that. We're going to points of interest, and then we're going to make our way through the entire book. But we're going to these things that we already know.
That's kind of the way it was intended.
Really?
Again, it really was. So the book is separated into by genre,
yes,
and then you've got the films in that genre. So it is absolutely designed so that you do not have to read it cover to cover. If you're interested in just versions of Star Wars, absolutely, you can go read them. Yeah. In some ways, you'll see that it kind of builds on itself, where you'll learn a little bit about an industry in one entry, and then you might learn a little bit more in another, but you can absolutely just jump into a film.
Wow. So let's talk about Lassie. In America, Lassie, A, I was shocked when I learned that Lassie was a female, and B, Lassie is a collie here in the States. What about around the world?
Around the world, she is still a collie.
Okay.
Lassie got a fairly recent remake in Germany.
Really? And
that was actually kind of the funny thing about it, is that in Germany and in much of Europe, I think Lassie's very well known. The TV series from the 50s got exported internationally, and so it ended up on television stations all over the world. So became very popular in Germany, and so they decided to do a new Lassie movie based on the original novel. And the problem with casting a Lassie movie in Germany, and when I say casting, I mean finding a dog, is that there were no collies really available for film work because they didn't tend to raise them for that because people associated them too much with Lassie. Mm-hmm. So they had to go elsewhere to find the dogs that they needed for the film.
Oh my God, man, 20 minutes with you is not enough. I could sit down and just share some coffee with you all damn day. Where's a website that people can go to find out more about you, Ed? Because, they're going to want more after this book.
Sure. Well, you can find me at my website, neonharbor.com, and you can learn about my book, some of the other weird stuff that I've done. And there's also a web series that I did for a little while called Deja Vu, where I look at some of these films. So if you want to see clips,
that's you on Deja Vu.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. That's when I told you I found clips and stuff like that. That's exactly where I got them.
Oh, well, hey. Yep, it's me.
Oh, my God. What a connection. What a small world.
Especially with films like this, I think.
Yes. Wow. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. I want to talk to you more, Ed.
I would love that.
Excellent. Will you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.